Good afternoon. Greetings to all of us. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Welcome to all participants. Before we begin, I would like to deeply apologize for the inconvenience and the late start of today's event. First, let us introduce ourselves. I'm Zaki Fauzan Zaino, and my colleague,
I'm Bayu Megantara.
as Master of Ceremony, will host the event at Indonesian Ocean Expo 2021 today. First of all, please allow me to explain what Indonesian Ocean Expo 2021 is. The ITB Marine Engineering Student Association, also known as KMKL-TB, and the ITB Marine Engineering Study Program has collaborated to organize this event with a theme of exploring innovative solutions to achieve sustainable development of global maritime sector. Indonesian Ocean Expo 2021 will raise the issue of sustainable development goals, innovations, and solutions related to engineering maritime affairs and the global maritime sector. This event is expected to be a forum for all parties who play a role in the maritime sector to collaborate in overcoming problems in the maritime sector, especially Indonesia. Indonesia Ocean Expo 2021 provides a great opportunity for all parties to explore insights and develop academic interest in the field of maritime.
Today's series of events will be delivered in one session entitled The Path to Sustainable Shipping Industry, with the speaker of Patrick Verhoeven, Managing Director Policy and Strategy at the International Association of Port and Harbor. The session itself will be moderated by Engineer Octaviani Tubaningsi, MP, PMP. Currently, Mrs. Octaviani is a lecturer of Marine Transportation major in Technology 10 November Institute of Technology in Surabaya. She is a project engineer with a 9 years experience in marine industry. Specialized in project cargo logistics, she also the member of Institute of Engineers Indonesia.
Before we start the event, there will be a welcoming speech from Dr. Entin Agustini Karjadi, MC, PhD, as Lecturer of Ocean Engineering, ITB. Without further ado, let's welcome Mrs. Entin.
Thank you so much, Zaki. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Entin Karyadi. On behalf of the Ocean Engineering Program, Institut Teknologi Bandung, I would like to welcome and thank everyone for attending this first session of webinar series Indonesia Ocean Expo 2021 organized by our students. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome and thank our distinguished speaker, Professor Patrick Verhoeven from the University of Antwerp, Belgium. He is also the Managing Director Policy and Strategy of the International Association of Ports and Harbor. The title of his talk is The Path to Sustainable Shipping Industry. This topic is very, very important for us with a vision of Indonesia as a maritime power, a global maritime axis. So I'm sure that today we can learn a lot from Professor Verhoeven. And especially for students, please do not hesitate to ask questions. And let us take this opportunity to have a fruitful discussion with Professor Verhoeven. And allow me one more time to welcome and thank Professor Verhoeven and everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Mrs. Entin. Before we begin the event, we would like to thank our sponsors, PT Maju Jaya Sakti Sejahtera,
PT Dwi Jaya Sentosa Abadi,
PT Pertamina Hulu Energy ONWC,
PT Asmin Barabronang,
PT Biro Klasifikasi Indonesia,
PT Alam Mulia,
PT SV Indonesia,
Paski CNOOC Madura Limited,
Epic Studio,
PT Petrochina International Jabung Limited,
PT Pertamina Trading and Consulting,
PT Timur Bahari,
and PT ASDP Indonesia Ferry who helped us to conduct this event.
Further, we will go into the first session presented by Mrs. Octaviani Turbaningsi. Please welcome Mrs. Pevi.
Hello everyone, my name is Fifi and I will be a moderator for today's session. I would like to welcome you all to the first session of Indonesia Ocean Expo 2021. In this occasion, we shall have outstanding presentation from our prominent speaker, whom I believe shall enrich our insight and knowledge regarding the sustainable shipping and port. Before the presentation begin, allow me to introduce our speaker. Mr. Patrick Verhoeven is Managing Director of the International Association of Port and Harbors, IAPH, responsible for policy and strategy. The organization represents about 170 ports and some 140 port-related businesses in 90 countries worldwide. Prior joining IAPH in 2017, Patrick has spent 24 years in Brussels, representing the interests of shipowners, port authorities, terminal operators, and ship agents at European Union level. He started his career in 1991 with the Antwerp-based ship agent Grisar and Felch. In 2019, Patrick joined the supervisory board of the Ukrainian Seaports Authority as deputy chairman. Patrick holds a PhD in Applied Economics and a Bachelor in Law from the University of Antwerp. He is currently assistant professor at the university's Center for Maritime and Air Transport Management, CIMAT. Patrick lives in Antwerp with his wife and 3 children. Okay, without further ado, I would like to welcome our presenter. He will deliver a presentation entitled Sustainable Shipping and Ports, the Case of Energy Transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Patrick Verhoeven. Mr. Patrick, the time is yours.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the occasion to join your virtual conference from Antwerp, where it's now 8 o'clock in the morning. Very gray and dull day. I'm sure the weather is much nicer in Indonesia right now. I will share the presentation and then we can get going. But I think the host first needs to allow me to do screen sharing. Yeah, thank you. Is this visible to everybody?
It's visible. It's
yeah,
visible.
Okay. Thank you. So let's get started. I have three. Sorry, there's an echo on the line. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you all right.
Okay, I think probably because some microphones are not muted that I have this echo. Could everybody unmute the microphone, please?
For everyone, I would like to remind you to mute all of your microphone.
Thank you. Okay, now the problem is solved. So this morning we will go, or this afternoon, we will go to three major topics. I will start with a general introduction on sustainability and what that means for the port sector, starting from the United Nations 2030 vision on sustainable development. Then we will go more deeply into the topic of energy transition and climate. And I will start with an overview of what is going on in the shipping sector, how decarbonization is taking place there. And then we will go into the port sector and look at what decarbonization and energy transition means to the port industry from various perspectives, not only from the maritime perspective, but also from industry and logistics. And then at the end, I will leave some points for the debate for discussion. So if we start with sustainability in the broader sense of the word and how that is applied to the port sector, of course, it starts with this. These are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They were adopted about 5-6 years ago. They cover a wide range of issues, and I think they illustrate that sustainability is indeed more than environment, with which we often, confuse sustainability with environmental protection. But sustainability is also about avoiding poverty. It's about education, It's about equal opportunities. It's about life on land. It's about peace and justice. And that is really the value added of this framework of the United Nations, is that it really provides a very comprehensive approach to sustainability. The aim is to reach these goals, which each of them have specific targets linked to them, that these are reached by 2030, which is only 9 years from now. And this is, of course, partly a responsibility of government, but the SDGs, as they are usually referred to, also apply to industry. And that is why, for the port sector, they are indeed a very useful framework. That was the reason for us in IPH to create in 2018 a program called the World Port Sustainability Program, WPSP, which is a program that we're running in partnership with a lot of other organizations, and you see them mentioned here on the screen. There's a series of other maritime or port-related international associations representing terminal operators, dredging companies, harbor masters. And we also have a series of regional port associations for the time being, from America, from Europe, from Australia, and from the Baltic. But the program is open to other port-related associations regionally to join and to support the implementation of the UN SDGs in the port sector. So also to associations, port associations in Asia or in the ASEAN region, you would be most welcome to join this program. What is it that we want to do? Of course, we want to apply the United Nations SDGs, but we do it in 4 ways. The most visible part of this program is an online library of projects of individual ports, how they cover or approach sustainability in various ways. It's also a portal for the initiatives of our partner organizations, but it also is a framework that looks towards the future and works as a sort of think tank for new collaborative projects that could bring the industry forward when we look at sustainability. And we also report on a regular basis. We did our first sustainability report last year in 2020, where we report on the global sustainability performance of the industry. 17 goals, that's a lot. We try to cluster them into 5 major themes that we think are most relevant to the port industry. We talk about sustainability. We start, of course, with infrastructure and the resilience of infrastructure, and that means several things. Resilience, it means to be ready for instance, extreme weather situation, but it also means digitalization and digital transformation. Of course, with COVID-19, resilience has received a new dimension, and that is resilience of supply chains and for pandemics or other unforeseen events. Very relevant. The second one, and that's the one that we will discuss mostly today, is climate and energy. So how to reduce emissions, carbon emissions of the industry, how to facilitate the energy transition. Safety and security is a very important one, and that also includes things like, for instance, cybersecurity. Community outreach, it's the most popular category. If you look at our database and the projects that are in there at the moment, most ports or most of the projects relate indeed to community outreach. That seems to be a high priority for a lot of ports around the world, is to have good relations with the local population living and working around the port area. And then finally, we have an area, governance and ethics, which also covers a broad range of issues, ranging from equal opportunities to anti-corruption, transparency, and other issues. And this is an example of the portfolio. It's online, so you can there look around according to the area of interest, the UN SDG, where the project is located. And it's very easy to upload for ports their own projects. There is a form that you just have to fill in, send the documentation that you want to share with the rest of the world, and then we will upload it on the database. And that's the idea, that then everybody can see what you're doing, what your good initiatives are, whether that is about environmental innovation, whether it's about litter collection, as you see here, or whether it's about a strategy to promote indigenous affairs, it's all part and parcel of sustainability in the very broad sense of the term. We also encourage, and that is then for our own members, sports that are members of IPH, if they share their projects, they also automatically qualify to join the annual awards that we reach out, sustainability awards. We did so last year in virtual form. Normally we do that during our conference, our annual conference. And you see here the winners of last year projects in the different categories that won the awards, the sustainability awards. Gives you a little bit more detail, an analysis of what is in the portfolio today. If you look at the 5 themes, resilient infrastructure, a lot of focus on IT, on digitalization, but also adaptation to climate change, adaptation of port planning. Climate and energy, there's a lot of projects there related to greenhouse gas emissions of shipping, which is a topic that we will address next. But it's also about efficiency of operations, renewable energy production, circular economy, and so on. And as I said, very popular category, community outreach and port city dialogue, which partly has an environmental dimension. It's about dealing with the externalities of port operations like noise or air pollution, matching the societal needs in terms of, for instance, education or culture or heritage, protection of ecosystems, and sustainable port management in itself. Safety and security, as I mentioned, also includes cyber security, and then governance and ethics. Examples that we have is about corporate social responsibility, innovation, and gender equality as the more popular topics right now. What we, as I said, it's not just collecting best practice that we want to do. We also want to help ports in integrating sustainability as part of their strategy of their and policy. And their, ports are very different. The objectives of ports around the world are different. Size is different. The market they operate in is different, and also the environment in which they are located can be very different. So it's not possible to provide, let's say, a template, a one-size-fits-all approach that you say, here you go and apply this, and you will have a good sustainability strategy. What we did is we provided for each of these 17 SDGs examples. This is sort of like a menu almost. You can pick and choose and say, well, this fits more my port when we talk, for instance, on water quality or when we talk about climate. And that allows you indeed to develop your own strategy on that basis. Some ports have already gone rather far in that, and their examples we also share as best practices. Ports in Australia, for instance, are at the top when it comes to this. Also, ports in Northwest Europe, like Antwerp and Rotterdam, have been doing some good work in integrating sustainability. But this is something that's available to any port. I mean, any port can include a sustainability element in its strategy. You just need to make sure that indeed you adapt it to your own needs and that you select those topics that are most relevant for the environment in which you are located. A new tool that we are bringing on the market this year is a game. It's an educational game that is meant to create more awareness of what sustainability means for ports. It's a game that is to be played at middle management level of port authorities. It is based on fictitious ports, but close enough to reality. And it allows you to work in team to make decisions around sustainability and around investments that are related to that, managerial decisions that you have to take. The pictures that you see, they were taken about a year ago. This was just before the pandemic broke out in Europe, when we were still able to sit closely next to each other. Today, that's a little bit more complicated, but we have produced a digital version of this game, and we are testing it at the moment. We had a very good test session the other day with UNCTAD, and we are going to roll it out in partnership with organizations like UNCTAD and also training institutes to indeed raise awareness about integrating sustainability in your port management, in your port strategy. I think that's the first block about the big picture, sustainability in the broader term? How do we apply it to the port sector? What is relevant when you want to integrate this in your strategy? Let's now move to the second topic. And I seem to have an echo, so could you please mute your microphones, please, because I don't hear myself. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So decarbonization of shipping, what are we talking about here? If you compare the performance of shipping by the emissions, comparing the emissions, CO2 emissions per ton kilometer that shipping performs, so the cargo that it moves over the distances, of course, shipping does very well. If you compare the industry to road transport or to aviation, it is one of the most energy efficient modes of transport. And for a long time, especially the shipping industry thought that this was enough. I mean, we are performing, we're 90% of global trade is carried by ship. Of course, we have emissions, but if you compare it to what we transport, we're doing very well. But of course, that is no longer a strategy that you can maintain, because if you look at the total emissions of the shipping industry, and there are various ways that you can measure them, but still the story is still the same. It's about 2 to 3% of global CO2 emissions of all industries in all sectors. 2% of that, or almost 3%, is from shipping, which is quite high. It is the same amount like, for instance, a country like Germany, an industrialized country like Germany. So over the years, the people started to realize that something needed to be done. It's not only good that, of course, there is a very energy efficient sector, but how can we improve its performance when it comes to CO2 emissions? And if you look at some of the forecasts that were recently made, if nothing happens, if business stays as usual, we are indeed going to see a major increase of CO2 emissions in the future, of course, because global trade is carried by shipping, and that makes it a very significant contributor. You all heard, I think, of the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, which set an ambitious target to reduce carbon emissions over the world. Shipping was excluded from that, also aviation, and that happened before as well. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea from 1982 puts the responsibility for regulation of carbon emissions of shipping on the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, specialized agency of the United Nations based in London. It's been there since the 1950s, is the regulator of shipping. Initially, strong focus on safety, but over the years also more and more at looking at the environmental impact of shipping. And it is under the MARPOL Convention, the Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships, that indeed a legal basis exists to address carbon emissions from shipping. And that is where the topic is at the moment, where it is discussed in the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the IMO. IMO was active on the topic before the Paris Climate Agreement. There were some important decisions taken in 2011, but they mostly focus on the energy efficiency of shipping, a new design for new ships, and an efficiency management plan for existing ships. Also in 2016, the IMO adopted a data collection system on fuel oil consumption. But these are only dealing with the efficiency. They're not dealing with the main thing, the absolute emissions of the shipping industry. It changed in 2018, so 3 years ago, after the Paris Climate Agreement. The IMO agreed on an initial strategy to reduce carbon emissions from shipping, and it set 2 targets. One, a carbon intensity target, which requires the industry to reduce emissions per transport work per ton kilometer by at least 40% by 2030 and moving to 70% by 2050. But the real game changer was the second target, to reduce the absolute emissions, the total annual emissions of shipping, with 50% by 2050 compared to 2008. And that was the most difficult element to get through the IMO, because the first one, as I said, is something that the industry could sort of, connect with, because they transport per ton kilometer, reducing that relative efficiency. That was the mindset that the industry was in. But an absolute target was much more controversial. But the IMO succeeded in getting to the strategy in 2018 and also rolled out a plan of measures that need to be taken to implement this. It's an initial strategy. It means that it will be revised in 2 years from now, that stock will be taken as to where the industry stands, and whether any of these targets may need to be adapted in the future. So what are some of these measures, short-term, mid-term, long-term? Short-term is what the IMO is working on right now. It's a lot focused on technical measures, again, related to energy efficiency or operational, like speed optimization. The role of ports is important in this, and I'll come to that in a minute. And also there is a requirement for member states in the IMO to set up national action plans. The more we go further, the more controversial it becomes, or the more difficult it becomes, because these are measures, the short-term measures are measures that people can still sort of easily, I wouldn't say they're all easy, but that's more the low-hanging fruit. These are things that you can implement in a fairly straightforward manner. It becomes a bit more complicated when you start looking at the real game changer, which is the use of low and zero carbon fuels, market-based measures. These are more controversial topics, but these are the topics that will in the end make the difference, because the real tool that you need to go to zero carbon or reduced carbon industry is, of course, alternative fuels, zero carbon fuels, and to provide the bunkering in ports for those fuels. And then we're talking about things like hydrogen and ammonia, some of the fuels that are being looked at. Methanol is also one that are being looked at right now. I mentioned ports. Ports are part of the short-term agenda. In 2019, the IMO adopted there a specific resolution inviting member states to encourage voluntary cooperation between port and shipping sectors to contribute to reducing the emissions from ships. There are 4 ways in which ports can facilitate. One is the provision of onshore power supply, so plug in the ship when it is at berth so that it's not using its own engines, but it's using electricity provided through the port. It's the supply of alternative low and zero carbon fuels, incentives that you can provide, and data collaboration to make sure that ships don't have to waste time when they are in the port, that they have a very optimal turnaround time. These are 4 focus areas that are in the resolution. And when we come to the third element of my presentation, when we go back to the ports industry, I will discuss some of these in a little bit more detail. IMO is not only a regulator, they also invest a lot in capacity building. And this is a very important program that was adopted or signed in 2019 called the IMO Norway Green Voyage 2050 project. It's quite a long name, but 2 significant things: 2050, because it's related to the IMO greenhouse gas strategy and the target to reduce emissions with 50% by 2050, and Norway, because Norway is the main funder of this program. And that is how most of the capacity building programs work, is that you have a member state or several member states that are donating money to allow capacity building in ports or in shipping industry in emerging and developing economies. And that is how this program works as well. We are partner of the program as IPH, and we will from this year onwards organize a series of workshops to facilitate ports, to help ports facilitate the energy transition of shipping. And these workshops will be organized, of course, online for the time being, and they will focus mostly on ports in emerging and developing economies around the world. So another side of the story. So one side is the regulation, but this is equally important. This is a program meant to help industry meet those targets in reality. And you see here the official signature of that program by the IMO Secretary General and Mr. Svein Oftedal, the representative of Norway in the IMO. It's not only a global story. Shipping is a global industry, of course, it's a worldwide industry, but some regions in the world are more ambitious than others when it comes to decarbonization. And one notable block of countries is the European Union. They have been developing their own measures already for a couple of years. They are also providing financial support to the IMO, but more and more we see that Europe is going its own way with certain measures on decarbonization of shipping. And that is, of course, because it is an ambitious block of countries, as I said. It's also a supranational entity, the European Union, which makes it very different from the IMO, which is an intergovernmental body. Supranational means that member states are actually conceding certain powers to the European Union and let them take decisions on their behalf, which is not something that you easily do in an intergovernmental situation. Europe adopted a Green Deal in 2019, where it is committed to reduce transport emissions in general by 90% by 2050. And it is currently considering measures to include shipping in its own emission trading scheme. And that is quite controversial, of course, because shipping is, as I said, a global industry. Shipping is not limited to transport between European ports. So how this is going to pan out, we will have to see. But a block like this puts a lot of pressure on the IMO, of course, to move forward. We will also see what the United States is going to do now after the elections, where they probably will go back to being more ambitious on decarbonization than they were under the previous government. So we might see some interesting political developments on the horizon when it comes to this topic in the IMO. Also, industry has changed a lot in a good sense. Before I took my role at IPH in 2017, I was Secretary General of the European Ship Owners Association based in Brussels. And in those few years that I was there, it's about 4 years, I witnessed really a change in mind shift, which is very significant. I think initially, a lot of the shipping companies were still in the sort of the mental mode, like we're doing okay. You know, if you look at us, what we perform, what we transport, 90% of global trade, and if you compare that to our emissions, we are actually the best kid in the class if you compare it to aviation and others, what I told you in the beginning. But still, the impact and the footprint is high. And over those years, gradually, and you always have, you know, front runners and those that are a bit lagging behind, but you saw clearly a shift in saying, well, this is also our problem. We also need to take efforts and make investments to reduce our carbon footprint as an industry. And that's a positive thing. And you see here on the slide some initiatives that were taken in recent years under the Global Maritime Forum, which is a think tank based in Copenhagen, supported by some big industry players like Maersk, for instance. And they developed some initiatives like the Getting to Zero Coalition, which is a coalition of 140 companies in the shipping industry that have made a pledge to have the first zero carbon vessel on deep sea trades by 2030, so in 9 years from now. They've also developed Poseidon principles, which are about financing, sustainable financing, and the Sea Cargo Charter, which is a charter signed by the charterers, which are, of course, very important players in shipping economics that also committed to this zero carbon future. So industry has also really played a very positive role in recent years, also in the IMO, which all helps, of course, in moving towards the targets that are set for the next decades. But it's not all easy. I mean, let's be honest about it. The ultimate game changer, as I said, to achieve these targets is the large-scale deployment of the zero carbon fuels. At the moment, there are quite some shipping companies already that invested in LNG, but LNG is very good when you talk about sulfur emissions and nitrogen emissions. It's very good in terms of air quality, but it's still a carbon fuel, and it's not as performant when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. So LNG is a transitional fuel. What we're really looking for is emissions that have indeed no carbon component. And then we talk about hydrogen and ammonia, methanol, and some other solutions. All that is still in very experimental phases, but it's those fuels that we will need to meet the IMO targets. And the investments are not small. There's one report that came out last year. I think this was mainly focused on hydrogen. I don't recall, but in any case, it said that if you want to have a supply chain that is working so that ships can indeed bunker these fuels, you need a budget of about 1 to 1.4 trillion US dollars. And what is interesting is that 87% of these investments are land-based. They are investments in the supply chain, and that includes bunkering infrastructure in the ports. Only 13% are required for the ship. So that is also, I think, a figure that it's an estimate, but the proportion is very interesting, because too often, I think we argue, this is the shipping industry's problem. Shipping should, invest in new ships, and and then the problem will be solved. Well, as we can see, that's not the case, because that's only 13% of the story. 87% needs to come from the energy providers, needs to come from the supply chain and from the ports. And we still have a lot of challenges to overcome with these fuels of the future, in terms of their technical maturity, the availability, also the safety. That is, is it safe to bunker them? Things like that. So that will still require quite some work to be done, quite some research to be done as well. And the political reality in the IMO, as in any other United Nations agency, is that ambitions are different. You have states that are front runners and that want to move very fast. I mentioned European Union countries. Maybe the United States will join that group as well, and now with the new administration. But you have many others who say, well, these are huge costs that will come upon our economies. We are not entirely convinced that we need to go that fast. So as a result, because it's an intergovernmental agency, decisions are always based on consensus, not on political majority. And that often leads to results which are lowest common denominator and not as ambitious as some may wish to see. So that's a challenge. Another challenge, and now it gets a bit technical, but when we talk about climate laws, like Paris Agreement and everything, there is an accepted principle of common but differentiated responsibility. That means that all countries have a common responsibility to indeed decarbonize, but the responsibility is different, because you have well-developed economies that have been polluting, let's say, for a longer time. There's historical pollution, and new developing economies. So the responsibility should be different. Those that are, have a bigger responsibility should also contribute more to the solution. That somehow conflicts with the IMO culture and principle, because in the IMO, the rule is that there's no more favorable treatment. Every, flag state should be treated in the same way, regardless what, the economic background is. And matching these two principles is actually, from a, more political point of view, also not so easy. So lots of challenges on the horizon when it comes to decarbonizing shipping. It's a very interesting situation that we're in right now. Of course, COVID-19 hasn't helped, because a lot of the important meetings that were scheduled to take place in the IMO were initially postponed and then went in online modus. But you can appreciate that it's not easy to have an online discussion with 174 governments. And so the train is moving, or the ship is moving, but we'll see how ambitious the outcome will be in the next months and next years. So this is just an illustration on the different fuel alternatives. It's a slide made by DNVGL. You see the options there: electricity and batteries, hydrogen, LNG, ammonia, methanol, and some others. And you can see it shifts from red to green. The more green, the more mature and the more ready to be used, let's say. And LNG, the light blue one, scores pretty good. But as we said, it's not a zero carbon fuel, it's a low carbon fuel. And the real alternatives like hydrogen, which is the darker blue one, they're still in ammonia, the red one, they're still on the left when it comes to technical maturity, fuel availability, infrastructure safety, and some of the other issues. So this gives you a visual indication of where we are with the main solution to decarbonize shipping industry, the alternative fuels. It shows that there is still a lot of work to be done before we will come to a mature situation. So that brings me to the last part of the presentation, which is the role of ports in energy transition. And from the outstart, it's maybe good to show this puzzle. It's a marketing gimmick that Port of Antwerp used some years ago, but I think it illustrates very well what a port is. It's not only maritime, it's not only cargo handling like containers or other trades, it's also logistics. And in a lot of ports, there is also industry. And it's those three elements that, of course, are all important when you talk about energy transition and decarbonization, especially the industry component. A lot of ports that have refineries in them, or they have coal plants or other industrial installations, of course, that adds a lot to the footprint of a port, the carbon footprint of a port. And when you look at emissions in general, so not only carbon emissions, but also others, there are actually three main sources. One is the scope one is what the port is generating itself. And with the port, then actually we mean more the port authority in a landlord configuration. So that means your own fleet, if you have a fleet of maybe tugboats or patrol boats, your own vehicles, your own buildings, and so on. Scope two is what is indirectly used, and that is the electricity that is being used for that you buy for the buildings in the port, for the operations. And then scope three is what is caused in a landlord configuration, again, by your tenants, like terminal operators, industrial companies, and the transport that is going on, road transport, rail, barges, you name it, and of course the shipping industry as well. And there are several pathways that ports can follow towards decarbonization, and we're not going to go in all of them. I will pick out a few that are now very, tangible at the moment, like electrification, fuel switch, and onshore wind, and so on. But this is a very interesting report that was published last year by DNVGL and Euroelectric, which gives a very good overview of what the options are for the ports industry. I talked about port authorities, and this is again a concept that has different application in different countries. Most ports around the world work on the landlord model, so that means that there is a port authority, but usually that port authority itself is not involved in the actual port operations. Land is leased to private operators, private companies to provide cargo handling and some of the other services. ESPO, our colleagues at the European Seaports Organization, already some years ago came up with an approach for port authorities when it comes to sustainability in general. So this doesn't only apply to energy transition, but as you start by giving the good example as a port authority. So you make sure that the things that you have direct control over, that you do them in the best possible way, and when it comes to decarbonization in the most energy efficient way. A second role you have is to enable, to facilitate, to make sure that your tenants, your users have the right conditions to provide, to work in a sustainable way. You can encourage them by providing incentives. You can engage by developing joint projects. And the last resort that you have as a port authority, because usually port authorities have regulatory powers, you can of course set standards and enforce compliance. But that's sort of the scale of options, starting with giving the good example, and at the other extreme end, enforcing measures. Major transitions that we need in the industry, it's moving from linear to circular, and I will say a few words about that in a few minutes. from a fossil-based to a bio-based industry, and from a monoculture to an ecosystem. Electrification is a topic that has received a lot of attention, and that covers a very broad range, but I think what has been most visible is the discussion on onshore power, providing indeed electricity to ships when they are at berth, so that they don't need to use their own engines. That is not an easy thing. I mean, it sounds easy, but as such, it's not easy. Of course, there are multiple benefits. Decarbonization, you also improve local air quality. And another benefit, especially if your operations are close to urban areas, for instance, cruise ships or ferry ships, is that you also reduce considerably the noise that ships are making, which is often one of the biggest complaints that people have about port operations. But it's very expensive. You need to have some sort of guarantee that if you invest, that ships also will be using it. It's fine to produce electricity and reduce the emissions of the ship, but where is the electricity coming from? If that electricity is not from renewable sources, then maybe in the end your effect on the climate may not be all that high. There's still some standardization issues to be solved. And yeah, if you are the only port doing it in the region and your other neighbors are not providing it, to what extent are you maybe disadvantaged from a competitive point of view? Because shipping goes where it's easy. So that's one of those are some of the concerns. This map, we produced it last year in our sustainability report. It shows you where today, in which ports today, high voltage onshore power facilities are available. The landscape is moving, so this map is probably outdated by now, but you clearly see where the focus is. You see Europe, you see China and India, and you see Canada and the United States. United States was a front runner with this, especially California, Los Angeles, Long Beach. They were one of the first ports in the world to introduce this, simply because local legislation was so strict, air quality legislation was so strict, that they were the front runners, and it was obligatory to use it. Which is the other thing, if you come to the challenges. One way to solve some of these challenges is to indeed make the use of onshore power obligatory for ships. And you indeed break the chicken and egg dilemma that a lot of ports are having. And that is indeed what happened in California. The other thing is clean marine fuel bunkering. That's the other major area where ports can help decarbonize shipping industry. As I said in the previous section of my presentation, this is the real game changer. This is what really will make a difference. But also here, we're talking about major investments in bunkering infrastructure. And yeah, if you decide today as a port that you want to invest in hydrogen, are you sure that your customers will be using it? So that brings again the same level of uncertainty that you have with onshore power supply. It's not going to be a future where there is only one fuel that is going to be the solution. All we hear now from the shipping industry is that it's probably going to be multiple fuels. Certain ship types, one fuel is better for them than others. So you will have to have a multiple offer, probably if you're a big port or multi-user port. And as I said before, it's issues about, is the fuel available? What is the quality of the fuel? And how safe is it to bunker? Now, luckily, we don't have to start from scratch because we have had and we are having the experience with LNG. Again, as I said, LNG is a transitional fuel. It's good for air quality. It's less good for decarbonization. But LNG had some of the same problems that we are discussing now: availability, safety concerns, and so on. In IPH, about 10 years ago, we started working on LNG bunkering, providing guidance to ports on how bunkering can take place in a safe way. That has resulted in a number of tools that are freely available. You can download them from this website. And we are now developing that package also for other fuels, like the ones that I mentioned, hydrogen, ammonia, and so on, so that we can rely on the experience of LNG bunkering, how we went about that, and apply it to the other fuels. Incentives, remember the 5 E's, enabling or encouraging rather, is a way for port authorities also to step in and incentivize the users to lower the emissions. Users can be ship owners, but also terminal operators and land-based mode of transport or logistic operators. One tool that's been developed also about 10 years ago is the Environmental Ship Index, which is a tool that allows you to evaluate the performance of the ships that are calling at your port. And ports that are doing better than what the minimum rules require, they will have a higher score in the index. And then it's up to you as a port to decide whether you want to give them an incentive. What most ports do that use this scheme is to give a reduction in the harbor use. So well-performing ships have to pay less port use. Again, there are challenges. I mean, it's a fairly easy system, but of course, for you as a port, your revenue, most ports' revenue depends to a large extent on port use. So to what extent are you in the economic possibility to give such incentives? For the shipping company and the supply chain, of course, a reduction of, let's say, 10% in the port use doesn't make that much difference in the total transport cost. So you could also argue how big is the impact? And what do you do with those that are performing less than what the rules require? And to what extent will you be able as a port authority to enforce penalties and make ships pay actually more if they don't perform according to the international norms? So these are some of the challenges that need to be taken into account here. This is the website of the Environmental Ship Index. So this is, again, a tool that we developed in IPH about 10 years ago. Which is now being completely refurbished. We're including a much stronger CO2 component in it, based on the last IMO regulations. And this is an overview of the ports that are currently using this index. And again, you see Europe being there, the Americas, Argentina, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, New Zealand, that are applying, and Oman as well, that are applying the index today. We're hoping that more ports will join, because the more ports that join, the more the effect will be as well. Another topic here is port call optimization. It's about reducing the time that ships are spending in ports, which is also a factor that will help reducing emissions, next to increasing safety and, of course, increasing efficiency. There are also some challenges that need to be solved here, contractual and operational. But in essence, this is not about technology. This is about trust. This is about data sharing between parties in the nautical chain. And this slide, I'm sure it's too detailed to see on the screen, but it shows you the complexity. This is what happens when a ship calls at a port. These are the business processes that are happening between all the different parties. Including contractual elements. Mapping that out in itself is already helps, because that you can see where indeed data collaboration can be improved, so that the ship gets the information of the berth in time, that it can sail at an optimal speed to the terminal and doesn't have to wait and spend emissions while waiting. Before concluding, some other topics that, and this goes then beyond shipping, where ports are investing when it comes to energy transition, offshore wind. Of course, that's not something for everybody, but ports that are close to wind farms, they could see here potential business as well for them. The circular economy. That is also a way ports actually that are best placed to invest in this, because a lot of activities are happening in ports, including industrial activities that provide opportunities for ports to take an active role when it comes to things like energy recovery, recycling, and so on. And carbon capture and storage is another opportunity if ports have industrial facilities that are located close to offshore locations, such as depleted gas fields. there is also possibility for ports to invest in those. It's not happening a lot right now, but it could be an area for the future. So I think we come more or less at the end of my presentation. I think it was 50 minutes. I think I'm almost at 50 minutes. Just a few points for the discussion. When we look at port authorities, which is our membership, their direct influence on energy transition is usually limited, especially if you're in a landlord configuration. But indirectly, there are many possibilities to influence decarbonization, as we saw the spectrum of opportunities ranging from from incentives to of course direct investments. There could also be new business opportunities. Our industry is an industry that is very much focused on volume, whether that's containers or tons of cargo or number of passengers. And maybe energy transition is also a way to diversify your business as a port. And one very important point, and maybe I haven't emphasized that enough, but it's cooperation. Because it's no good for a single port to decide to do incentives to invest in onshore power or bunkering. You need several ports to do it together, especially in a region, so that ship owners are not tempted to go there where it's easy, where there's no rules. You need collaboration between ports, especially on a regional basis. And a major challenge, I think, for landlord ports is what do you do with fossil-based industry that are a tenant, that are leasing land in your port, or even in a more extreme situation that own land in your port, like, for instance, coal factories or something like that. How do you deal with that? Because these are, of course, major investments. And how are you going to, as a port authority, do something about it? You need, of course, government backing. That's clear. So I think that's what I had. I start with a small publicity shot at the end. This is our annual conference this year, unfortunately also virtual, end of June. Climate and energy will be one of the major themes in the conference, but we will also look at other things like risk and resilience and data collaboration, innovation. And running up to the conference, we also have a series of webinars that are being organized in the coming months. So I warmly invite you to have a look at the conference website. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and thank you most sincerely again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you. I think you're muted, Vivi. Your microphone is off. Vivi, your microphone is off.
Sorry that my microphone is off and only committee that can open it. So thank you very much for your presentation. This is very insightful and interesting topic. So now we will have come to the question and answer session. I will read the question from Slido and read it to you. I hope committee can share screen about the Slido question, or I will read it by myself. Okay, while we're waiting, we already have a few questions. So the first question is from Bagus from ITS. The question is how to relate between the cybersecurity with port sustainability in Industry 4.0 era. So this is about the digital transformation as well. So maybe Mr. Patrick, you can explain to us how does the cybersecurity will be affecting to the port sustainability?
It's an important factor. Digital transformation is indeed something that is part of sustainability. We have very recently done a survey among ports to see where they are in the digital transformation. And it shows that there's a very different landscape out there. I think if you look at the basic requirements of digital exchange of information between ship and shore, only 1/3 of the ports that we surveyed have that in place. 1/3 is implementing it, and 1/3 still has to start. Of course, the more digital you go, the more vulnerable you become to cybersecurity. So cyber really needs to be part of your investment in digital transformation from the start, from the early stages of the process. Especially during COVID-19, we have seen that the number of cyber attacks have increased in ports. And what we're currently doing is we are preparing a submission to the IMO, to the Marine Safety Committee, with a proposal to develop guidelines for cybersecurity for ports and port facilities linked to the ISPS code. That already exists for shipping, but not for ports. And I think it's really important that we do this so that ports can indeed include cybersecurity in the very early stages of digital transformation. It's not something that you can do afterwards. It needs to be there from the start.
Okay. So I believe that the digital transformation also have a challenge that their maritime cybersecurity become a part of their problem on that. So from this also the second question almost the same about the cybersecurity, and also what do you think will be the biggest challenge and then the obstacle of during this digital era and also the COVID-19 pandemic to the sustainable shipping industry that already been we already have European Union already have a path for this sustainable shipping. Will it be differ your plan on this sustainability?
Yeah, I think the question is sustainability in the digital era. And
Yes.
Again, something that came out of that survey is that we asked ports, what is your biggest challenge for digital transformation? And interesting that the answer was not technology, the answer was not budget, but the answer was trust between stakeholders. Port communities, of course, is complex. You have very different, parties involved. You have authorities, you have customs, you have the ports, you have, private business, ship owners, terminal operators. And to allow digital transformation, you need data collaboration. You need people to trust, to exchange data with each other. And this is also a security issue. And this is also related in some extent to cybersecurity. And building that trust and allowing that data collaboration is the biggest challenge. That is by far the biggest challenge for digitalization.
Okay. So the digitalization, we need to build the trust between all the port community and also within the each country.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And government support is also extremely important.
Yeah, government support. We need to support this trust issue for their transformation. And the next question is about the, I think how about the impact of the COVID-19 to all the plan that already been for the sustainable shipping industry? Is there any some delay on this because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the COVID-19, of course, hasn't helped in that sense. On the other hand, it's an opportunity. I think COVID-19 has illustrated the vulnerability of supply chains that are based on paper interaction or on people interaction. The more digital you go, in that sense, the more safe you are and the more efficient you are to exchange information. That's the reason why we took this COVID-19 and more to say this is an eye-opener. We have been in this crisis. We have seen that a lot of ports still rely on quasi paper-based interaction. That makes them very vulnerable. So let's use it as an opportunity to accelerate digital transformation. And we have now reached out to a number of institutes in terms of capacity building. We started with the World Bank, and together with them, we produced, and I will share the link with you, this guidance document on acceleration of digitalization. The World Bank is also working now on a program related to that, and we've also are talking to the IMO and the World Customs Organization to see how we can invest in capacity building, especially in emerging and developing economies, to move digitalization forward faster. And COVID-19, I think, has helped us in that way, an eye-opener.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Okay. The next question is about the decarbonization. I also have the same question about this. How can developing country like Indonesia can transform into decarbonization? Because as we know that will be having a huge investment. So what kind of strategies should we do as the developing countries?
Yeah, that's not an easy question. I think it has to start with mapping out where your carbon footprint is. That's always the starting point. I mean, where are most emissions generated when it comes to Indonesian ports? Is it mostly from shipping? Is it mostly from industry? Mostly from other activities? That's the first thing. And there are actually some very good guides developed by the IMO, which are freely available, that will help ports to make that evaluation. Start with the inventories. Start seeing where are we, performing worst, let's say, when it comes to emissions. And once that is done, you can indeed then build a strategy to say, should we look at incentives? Should we look at bunkering? Should we look at onshore power, depending on how your customers are organized as well. But my advice would be to start with those first steps, to map out where your emissions are, what type of emissions they are, mostly shipping, mostly industry, and then look at the solutions. And I think the capacity building that is currently being developed by the IMO, for instance, under Green Voyage, I'm sure that a country like Indonesia would qualify for being involved in those programs. So that's another advice that I would give, is to look into those possibilities, like Green Voyage, World Bank, some of the other programs that are currently being developed to facilitate decarbonization in our industry.
Okay, thank you. So this is almost similar question from Ramdan Yassin, but how about the challenge on the port sustainability in Indonesia?
I'm not sure I can answer that question very well. I've been in Indonesia, but it's some years ago. I think the last time I was there is about 4 or 5 years ago. I think you need to look at sustainability in the broad sense. I mean, look at it from the environmental point of view, but maybe there are more pressing issues, maybe related to, I don't know, maybe related to education, or maybe related to other topics that need to be looked at. The SDGs give you a good basis to start. And it's the same thing. You can do a very easy mapping exercise to say, okay, when we look at sustainability and the different components, what is relevant to our industry in Indonesia? Is it more environmental issues? Is it more safety issues? Is it more governance issues? And from that, you can start building a strategy. But I would have to look a little bit deeper into the current situation in Indonesia before I could give you any concrete advice, because I don't have the sort of overview in my head as to what may be the main issues at the moment. I do know that Indonesian ports have been sharing projects through our World Port Sustainability Program. So that's good. And that's what I would really encourage them to continue doing.
I also hope so that Indonesia will go to the World Sustainability Program itself. So the next question
members of
is
IPH,
from,
so they can use the tools at leisure.
Yes. The next question is quite technical from Dana Arya Putra. So beside the emission, is there any concern on other issues that are currently being studied, like for the ballast water discharge on ships that can damage point 14 in UN SDG?
Yes. Yeah, the ballast water is covered by a specific convention, ballast water convention, IMO convention, that was came into force very recently. So I think there is now a legal framework that applies. It took a long time before this convention really became applicable. There were many issues also with different standards being used, for instance, the United States compared to other countries. But I think the legal framework is now in place, so that topic countries should be able to address that topic according to the international standards that are now available.
Okay. The next one is the influence of the progress of the wharf in achieving sustainable shipping industry. I think her question is about how does the port infrastructure, port basic infrastructure, need to be developed in order to achieve the sustainable shipping industry.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering what was meant with the wharf, but you mean the infrastructure, basically,
Yes,
the port
yes.
infrastructure. Yeah, yeah. It means investing in the facilities for bunkering. It means onshore power. These are things that are related to making terminals ready for these facilities. Of course, that's easy when you speak about brand new installations. You can include them. Adapting infrastructure is, of course, often more complicated, and more complicated from a planning, but also from an investment point of view. But clearly, it has an influence. I mean, if you have bunkering facilities for LNG or zero carbon fuels, onshore power, that of course will make your infrastructure ready for the future. But as I said before, the difficulty is knowing what that future is going to be, and knowing what your client will be requiring in the future. And that's where we have seen most of the difficulties so far when talking about things like onshore power or LNG bunkering infrastructure. It's knowing or having the guarantee that the infrastructure will also be used in the end, and that it's not there in vain and causing a lot of economic problems.
Okay, I think the mapping exercise for what we needed to develop in our port, that one is the starting part. So the next question is from Dr. Umi Sakia, UB Malang, Indonesia. So this is what is the indicator of the success examinator, and also what will be the penalty. I think this is the question regarding what is the success of sustainability, or how is it? Okay, I
Yeah,
think
that.
what, yeah,
Mhm,
what I
mhm.
can what I can conclude for this question is what is the indicator of the sustainability successful, the successful sustainability for the port and the shipping industry.
Yeah, it's difficult to measure that as such, because every port will have its own sustainability goals and sustainability concerns. So you cannot examine that at let's say at global level. You would need to look at it mostly from a local perspective and say, okay, my port is maybe in a sensitive ecosystem, so that could be one of our priorities. Or my port is very closely located to a city. So good interaction with that community is important from a sustainability point of view. So you have to differ. Your strategy has to be adapted to your environment. But then, yeah, when it comes to international norms or national norms, there is a possibility for penalties indeed. If you don't comply with certain regulations on emissions or others, it is possible to impose penalties. But again, that will be mostly done at national level or even at local level. I mean, the IMO, if we look at IMO legislation, the IMO is not an enforcer. They can develop regulation, they can monitor the implementation of regulation, but they don't have, like, for instance, a supranational body like the European Union. They cannot take governments to court if they don't comply and impose fines, whereas the European Union can do that. So you also have to look at it from that perspective, especially when you look at international regulation to emissions or ballast water or some of the other things.
Okay. And this for this issue, who will be the examinator? If for the international we have IMO, for the national, what will be your suggestion for the examinator?
Yeah, I think it's national government. I mean, whatever their policies are and their, for instance, national climate plans are or national air quality plans are, I think that's the standard to which you need to compare the performance.
Okay. Okay. The next question is, what will be the framework for the selection of sustainable infrastructure project if you using the public-private partnership scheme?
Yes, I think that's in where you come as port authorities, for instance, in landlord configurations, that you have the ability to set criteria when you are selecting either terminal operators or investors in your port, that you can set a number of sustainability criteria, performance criteria, for instance. What is common, or what you see at least in more and more terminal contracts, is criteria related to modal shift, for instance, that those investing need to guarantee that X% of the cargo will be moved by rail or barge, if that's possible, rather than road. You can also set criteria on the type of equipment that needs to be used on the terminal in terms of electrical equipment or emissions. That is how you can do that through contracts.
So there will be a lot of multi-criteria for the decision making and for decide which project is considered as sustainable infrastructures. Okay.
Yes, and it will be again different
So,
according to the regions. Huh?
yeah. Okay. And we have another question about is that possible if we do energy transition and use water as resource for the energy? Is there any research about that?
Yeah, I think hydropower is definitely a source of energy. I'm not so familiar with any concrete examples right now, but definitely this is part of the energy the mix that we need to look at. And definitely, I'm sure there is research available on that, but I don't have any sort of concrete example that I could give you right now. But certainly in construction of infrastructure, renewable energy, using water stored in dams, for instance, or flowing in rivers to create electricity is definitely something that can be used. And I would imagine that also within port area, this is something that can be looked in. I think there is an example. I would have to look in our own database that hydropower was used for operating locks in a port, but I would need to look into it again. I don't have it readily available here.
Okay, so for the one that asking about the water as resource for energy, can look for the research about the hydropower. Okay, the next question, what approach do port authorities need to take to attract the investor to invest in their port, so they could apply the energy transition alternative? So it's like the marketing strategy for the port.
Yeah, it's about. I think this is actually the starting point, is indeed to have your own sustainability strategy as a port. I mean, what do you want to achieve? I think that's the first thing, and maybe I didn't explain that in too much detail, but when you look at the 17 SDGs, as I said, it's a very broad range of issues that are covered under there, and nearly everything is covered. So, but what is most relevant to your port? That's where you have to start with. Is it an issue about vulnerable ecosystems? Is it more, your priority is more about city-port relations? That needs to be mapped out first. You have to have your own strategy, say, these SDGs and these elements are most relevant to us. and we will invest there. That then translates into your commercial policy, your marketing policy, and so on. I think the main guidance or the main advice is that it's an integrated process. It's not just the responsibility of your environmental department. This is part of your overall strategy as a board. And then, of course, your investor policy will link to that and will set out the priorities.
Okay, thank you. While waiting for, we already have another question. So what is the thing that we needed to make all countries to support this SDG, especially for the shipping and port industry?
Awareness. I think the answer is awareness of the SDGs. Even if they've been around now for 5-6 years, it's still surprising to see that how few people really in the industry are aware of what this approach is. We started with our own program in 2018, and I think we're now gradually getting more and more ports that understand what this means and what they need to do to integrate it into their policies and strategies. We're also helping them with that, with as I said, the educational game, and we've got other initiatives. But it's a process that needs time because the misconception, I think, still is that sustainability is only environment, whereas it's much broader than that, and you need to really look at all the aspects to come to a real approach that is in line with the SDG approach. The understanding and awareness that it covers every aspect of your business and every level within your organization. I think that's what's needed, and that's why we have this program, for instance, to grow that awareness, and we're getting there gradually, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay, while waiting for another question, we have a few minutes. I would like to ask my own question. So we have read the news about the merger port of Antwerp and also port of the Zeebrugge. I hope I pronounce it correctly. So based on your opinion, what will be the benefit and the challenge of this merger?
Yes, I think it was in the pipeline for a long time, this discussion about Antwerp and Bruges getting together. I think it will optimize the available capacity that is there. Of course, Bruges, Zeebrugge is a port that is located on the coast, whereas Port of Antwerp is 80 kilometers inland. Both ports have their strong points and their advantages, and I think by the merger, you will see a more optimized use of the available infrastructure. I think it will also provide opportunities in the energy market because Zeebrugge has one of the few LNG plants in Europe. So it's a win-win, I think. But it took, I mean, as always with mergers, especially if you deal with autonomous companies and two cities that are behind it. So Zeebrugge is owned by the city of Bruges. Port of Antwerp is owned by the city of Antwerp. Politics are always making these things more complicated, perhaps, than they should be. But I think now that the decision is taken, I think there will be opportunities. Well, first of all, in the container market, because of the combination of a deep sea location and an inland location. Strong points. Zeebrugge is one of the leaders in Europe when it comes to ro-ro traffic, so that is also a point. And I think they're looking also at opportunities for, especially on energy transition, to have stronger collaboration and a stronger position in the market.
Okay, thank you. And okay, how about the other countries that haven't developed their port? So the nation deserves to apply for the sustainable shipping industries. So for example, like Timor-Leste, maybe. How about how this country can apply this sustainable shipping?
Well, that's what I said before, is that's the dilemma that you have, of course, that sustainability, when you look at the Paris Climate Agreement, there is that common but differentiated responsibility that the industrialized countries, of course, have been industrializing longer, but they've also been polluting longer. So you need to balance that in that sense. And I think that all the capacity building programs that are now being developed on sustainable shipping, they focus especially on the emerging economies and give them support. in various ways. And that can include financial support, but it's also educational support, training, and so on. That's part of that differentiated approach.
Okay.
Because it's no point only to see this as a problem of the developed countries. I think sustainability affects everybody, but
Yeah.
there are different approaches that are needed according to the level of development.
Okay. So the level of approaches for developed countries, developing countries, and also underdeveloped countries, that will be different and depend on the government itself. And we have another
Yes,
question.
and the international programs as well. I think the
Okay.
international support programs, as like Green Voyage, for instance, they are focusing especially on ports in emerging and developing economies.
Yes. Mr. Patrick, we have one question from the chat regarding the IoT. So regarding the port call and also the IoT, data collaboration to make effective time at port. Is it about the technology to support the operation process at port? For example, like IoT and also with the IODB, integrated operation dashboard, for the purpose of transparency data. Is it something that can be related to the port to support the sustainability?
Yes, I think technology is there definitely to support things like port call optimization, but the technology is not the issue. The issue is trust. Technology is only there to enable and to facilitate, but if parties don't want to share the data that are needed, then you can have the best technology in the world, but it will not solve anything. What we saw very clearly with things like port call optimization, that it requires a culture where different authorities, nautical players like pilots and tugboats, harbor masters, are willing to share the data that is needed. And then, yeah, I mean, there's so much technological options available today that can facilitate that. But the starting point are the data. If those are not shared, then we can look at all the bright and best technologies, but they will not help us one bit. And that came also out of that survey that we did among the ports. When we asked them, is technology a barrier? And most of them said no. Technology is not the barrier. Technology, we know what is available, we know what we can do, but first we need to be used in the material. The input has to be there, the data have to be there.
Based on your experience, how you increase the awareness of the all the party within the European Union, like shipping agency, cargo owner, or the shipping lines regarding this sustainability, or else for the information, IoT, or etc.
I'm not sure I quite understood your question, Vivi. But...
Because the problem is for the awareness. We don't know that we already have the technology, but sometimes we don't want to use it, like for the automatization, etc. But so based on your experience, how you increase the awareness of the people involved in the shipping industry?
Yeah, it starts at community level. I think every port is a community of actors. And I think a port authority has a very important role in creating awareness and building trust. Not all ports do that. Not all ports see that as part of their role, but I think they should. Port authority is more than a regulator and a landlord. I think they have a responsibility simply because they connect to everybody. That they have that responsibility of being the trust builder, the community builder, and that's where awareness starts, and that's where trust is start. You need one party to take the lead, and the best placed party, in my view, is a port authority. Why? Because most of the time it will be a public entity, but they are, of course, in touch with both business and society. So they are, as a sort of hybrid, they are connected to both worlds, and that makes them, in my view, the best placed to create that community sense and awareness and trust. I realize it's many ports are not there yet, but this is something we promote also in IPH, is this community building role and how you can achieve that.
Okay. So Okay. The next question will be, what will be the impact on the developing countries if the project estimated 2015 describe the decarbonization shipping, were implemented? Will there be an imbalance in the shipping industry?
I'm not sure there will be an imbalance in the shipping industry, but the main concern is that there will be an imbalance between countries. And that's what I said, that is the principle that has been accepted in climate regulation is this common but differentiated responsibility. But the IMO doesn't have that principle. The IMO has the principle that every flag state, rules should apply the same to every flag state, regardless of, where they're coming from. That is the concern, and that needs a solution somehow. One of the possibilities, but this is of course controversial, is that to facilitate this strategy, the 2050 strategy, is to introduce market-based measures and introduce, for instance, a carbon tax or something like that on shipping, and that the revenue that is generated from that tax could be used in priority to help developing countries meet the climate standards. That's one of the issues that is in the list of measures. I showed you short-term, medium-term, long-term, but it's extremely controversial discussion. But it could be one of the solutions to keep everybody on board, because that is the problem currently in the IMO discussion, is that the friction between the principle that IMO rules apply to all the 174 member states and the principle of climate regulation of the common but differentiated responsibility. And to match those two principles, you need maybe a solution like a market-based measure, something like that, that could bring revenue or support to ports or shipping industry in developing countries.
Okay, thank you. So there's another question from Dr. Omi. Is there any obligation for countries in the world to join the sustainability scheme in European Union, US? I think this one should be part of IMO membership. Will this impact on the exporter countries that not yet joined this program?
Yeah, well, yeah, a scheme like our sustainability scheme is voluntary, of course, but a lot of countries, and you mentioned EU and you mentioned United States, have pretty stringent rules and regulations when it comes to sustainability, and especially when it comes to the environmental component. And that may have implications if they want to apply those to shipping. And that's the example that I was giving about Europe currently considering to include shipping in its emission trading scheme. But that will not only affect shipping between EU ports, it would also affect shipping that is coming from overseas. And the emissions from the last non-EU port to the first EU port would have to be included in that emission trading scheme. So that could have indeed an impact. And that is also what makes it so controversial. The EU has tried it with aviation in the past. They have tried to include aviation. In the end, they had to compromise because of so much pressure from third countries to make it purely intra-European. So only aviation between European airports is included. So we could see maybe that this measure would only apply to ports within the EU. Only to shipping between EU ports. Because if you include overseas, then you get into this sort of discussion as, what is the impact indeed on exporter countries, and how will they take it from a diplomatic and political point of view. So unilateral approaches are always complicated, especially in shipping, because shipping is a global industry, it's a global business. So you best regulate at global level, and then you end up at the IMO, of course. Regional, local legislation always has complications when we talk about shipping, and whether that's about emissions or it's other things. It's a recurring threat. So this is a very valid question that needs to be considered by countries like EU and US. But the thing is, European Union and maybe now the United States as well, They see themselves as leaders when it comes to sustainability. They want to be the greenest, cleanest, healthiest in the world. But yeah, to impose that or have effects on third countries is, of course, is always controversial. And in shipping, you see that per excellence, because it is an international business, a global business, not just a European or American.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Will be our last question for today's session. So thank you very much for very informative and also in this interesting talk. And thank you also for the audience for your active participation. Now the committee of IOE 2021 would like to give their token of appreciation for you as our speaker for today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe committee would like to share the token of appreciation. Okay. I think this is the certificate of appreciation given to.
Okay, thank you for the given opportunity. In a count of 3, 2, and 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
So
much.
next,
Most appreciated,
very
and thank you again for the kind invitation. It would have been a pleasure to be with you in Indonesia. As I said, it's since 2017 I wasn't here, so it's high time for me to come back. So as soon as things are possible, I look forward to that, and I'm very grateful for this certificate. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you very much for your interesting topic today. And now we will go to the committee because we will take the photo session.
Thanks to Mr. Bohaven who has delivered the material, and thank you also Mrs. Vivi who has led the session in the afternoon today. We will now take a photo session with the three major speakers, including Mrs. Entin. So we would like Mrs. Entin to open your camera, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Committee, is this the photo session already finished?
Not yet. We're still waiting for the spotlight.
Okay.
Okay. I realize I forgot to do one thing. I forgot to put this slide behind me.
Yes.
I can still do that.
You maybe still have some time, or it's too late.
Because you sent me something this morning, and I was so in a hurry this morning that I forgot all about it. Just a moment, because I have never done this with Zoom, so I don't know how this works. Let me try. I have the picture. Okay, I have to save it then, I suppose. So how do you do that in Zoom? Change the background. Does anybody know?
Yeah, there's a stop video, then you can choose virtual background.
Where do I do that?
There's a stop video in the below the video
Video
icon.
yes, yeah.
Yes, and then you click.
I see.
Then you choose the virtual background.
Okay, okay. Then where do I find this? Oh, okay. Plus. Okay, okay. We might get there. We might get there. Sorry about this. IPH. Yeah. Good. I'm in the file. Now I need to find the picture. Sorry, it takes a while to trace this. Ah, I got it. Open. Hey, there we are.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes. Yes. You can see it.
Okay.
Okay, so there are currently 3 slides with camera on my screen. So I will capture the first slide in the count of 3.
No, but I see mine is wrong. No, mine is in mirror.
Oh, you can unclick the mirror video, maybe. Oh, I think this is correct.
Is it?
Yes.
Yes, you're fine, sir.
I'm okay. All right. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay, for the first slide, 3, 2, 1. Now for the second slide, 3, 2, 1. For the third slide, 3, 2, 1. And now the fourth, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, moderator, for the given opportunity.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much to Mr. Verhoeven and Mrs. Vivi and Mrs. Entin. We will now have the photo session for every participant at the event. So if everyone else could turn on your camera, we very appreciate it. I'm going to take our final photo session. Would everyone please turn on your cameras? Okay, I think that's enough time for everyone. We can now start the photo session. We'll take committee start photo.
Okay. So the photo session now is over, is it?
Yeah, I guess it's over now, I guess.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
To all the major speakers, Mrs. Vivi, Mrs. Verhoeven, and Mrs. Entin. Thank you also to all participants who have attended the Indonesia Ocean Expo 2021 event today. Once again, we would like to thank our sponsors. PT Maju Jaya Sakti Jatera,
PT Dwi Jaya Sentosa Abadi,
PT Pertamina Hulu Energy on Meje,
PT Asmin Bara Brona,
PT Biro Kasperasi Indonesia,
PT Alam Mulia,
PT SV Indonesia,
Husky CNOOC Madura Limited,
Epic Studio,
PT Petrosina International Jabung Limited,
PT Pertamina Training and Consulting,
PT Timur Bahari,
and PT SDP Indonesia Ferry who helps us connect this event.
and do not forget that tomorrow we still have an event that is no less interesting, which is Going Blue, Realizing Blue Economy in Indonesia. So do not forget to come tomorrow at 7 p.m. sharp. Last, Bayu and my colleague would like to say goodbye, take care, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Verhoeven.
One more
you.
reminder
Thank you.
for the
It
feedback.
was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Fifi. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Prof.
And you also
Verhoeven.
participate.
Thank you, Fifi.
Thank you, Vivi.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you,
participating
Mr.
in
Patrick.
this event.
Hello, Miss
Thank you,
Entin.
everyone.
Thanks, Fifi. See you.
Thank
See
you. See you.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Mungkin nenggone kayak feedback ya. Nggak usah ya, saya ke ono. Ya, apa yang kamu sukai? Waduh, anu aja.